let's shift that. Okay. So in my industry, it's interesting because when I first started off at Merrill, I had been a part of different organizations, and one of the people that I knew, tremendously successful guy, had a reputation for being very, very generous, but really tough. And at one point I asked him, I said, look, if you really need a financial advisor, let's talk. And he looked at me and he said, I'll give you a chance. So we arranged to meet at a Starbucks. He chose the Starbucks. He got there 30 minutes before I did. So
Mm.
he was way early.
And we are the
Okay.
Money, the Mindset, and Mentoring podcast. We got Monica Kaufman here with us today. And we were just having such a good conversation. We're like, shoot, we should have just pressed the record button back then. And,
And I was silly and I didn't mention it, but that's okay.
no, it's all good. It's all good. Money is such an important conversation to have. And, I've got the podcast, the Money Mindset and Mentoring podcast. And what sits right in the middle of money and mentoring is the word mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the one thing that as people talk about investing, as people talk about saving or earning money, is really what is their mindset around that. And I want to start talking about that first and kind of get your interpretation of what is a healthy or what is an unhealthy money mindset.
Okay, so let's define the term mindset. And if we're looking at it from a technical viewpoint, I would argue that it's the lens through which you perceive, feel, think, and act. Okay, so my mindset on money is this is a tool in my hands. What am I doing with it? And that's something I'll tell people. It's like, look, it's nothing more than a set of tools. There's no reason to be afraid of tools. But like the first time I used a hammer as a kid in a woodworking class that my mom signed me up for, I literally was a little afraid of it. First time I used a saw, I was a little afraid of it. First time I sanded something and was a little sloppy, I understood why I needed to be a little bit concerned. It's the same thing with your money. So I don't want people to be afraid, but I also want people to be aware that there's all sorts of emotions with it, and you need to be aware of your emotions. I can tell in my own life what's going on with my emotions based on some of the financial choices I'm tempted to make. And so what I struggle with and I work with people on a lot of times is let's get the mindset right. Let's understand what a true wealth mindset is and what it isn't. And then let's go from there. Like I'll give you an example. I was involved with a women's organization here, very prestigious. They do unbelievable charitable work. They do so much, both on the personal level and on the larger level. They have a huge impact in the community. And yet there are a lot of people who get involved with the organization for the wrong reason. They're using it only as a networking tool. And you usually can tell those are the people because they have on the floor all the fake Louis Vuitton bags. So I described it one day as it was as if the Louis Vuitton monster had vomited out all the fakes all over the floor. Okay. And here's the piece. The people that I know of who have true wealth don't need to project that. Now, there are people for business reasons or for career reasons where they will project wealth and they will project that as part of their costume. And I understand that. But if you're not that person, my question is, what are you doing here? If this is something that you can afford to do and it doesn't affect you, great, do it. But if it's not something you can afford to do you really think it's actually sending the message you think it is?
I love wearing brands. It's something that's really important to me. And the brands I love wearing is like my mortgage business, Real Approved. I love wearing my real estate brand, Keller Williams. I love wearing my podcast brand, podcastlaunch.ai. Those are my favorite brands to wear. If I'm wearing somebody else's brand, like a Louis Vuitton, I feel like they should be paying me because I'm advertising them.
But you have a wealth mindset because you value yourself and you're promoting yourself. Okay. For me, quality is something that matters. And that matters more to me than the outward sign of the logo or the brand. Okay. So again, it just is.
I think it also, when it comes to that personal branding, and it's something I think it's really important. But when it comes to that personal branding idea, I think back to a time where I was a real estate agent and I was out showing houses and I'm driving down the street and I'm Dutch. So we're known to be a little frugal. Okay. And I'm driving this old jalopy of a Volkswagen Jetta and the shocks are kind of a little soft and I'm going down and and we're going over this one road that has the more speed bumps than I think I've ever seen. It was ridiculous how many speed bumps this road had. And every time I go over, my car is just twerking on the back end as
Right.
my clients are, and they're just watching my car twerk, and they're like, and I could see them giggling in the back. And then doesn't the trunk just let go? And
No.
now it's just like popping open. And so I'm twerking and popping my collars, as I'm going down the road, I'm thinking I'm mortified. And then as we pull up into the house that we're going to show, another one of the other real estate agents pulls up in his shiny new Tesla, and they're like, "Oh man, he must be really successful." And I'm thinking, I know that agent. I make 4 times as much as that guy does, and because I know with the GCI that guy has, and I'm driving this car, but it was the perception of wealth that was required in certain industries and in
Right.
certain
Well,
situations.
let's shift that. Okay. So in my industry, it's interesting because when I first started off at Merrill, I had been a part of different organizations, and one of the people that I knew, tremendously successful guy, had a reputation for being very, very generous but really tough. And at one point I asked him, I said, "Look, if you really need a financial advisor, let's talk." And he looked at me and he said, "I'll give you a chance." So we arranged to meet at a Starbucks. He chose the Starbucks. He got there 30 minutes before I did. So
Mm,
he was way early. I was early. He wanted to see the car I drove up in, and he wanted to see how I acted with the baristas and everybody else around me. He
mm,
wanted to see if I was real with people who could help me versus people who couldn't. And he was judging if I really was the person that I thought, if I really am the person that he thought I was. And he told me about it. Now, mind you, this man was driving a 7-year-old Acura. And he told me he was pleased to see me drive up in a top of the line Honda Accord at that point, V6 with leather. Okay. That was a couple of years old, well maintained. But he didn't want me driving up in a Mercedes Benz. He
mm.
didn't want me driving up in something that he didn't think I could afford. This is a man who was living in a house that you wouldn't believe. Like most of the people that I've had as clients who've been very financially successful do not flaunt it. They
Yep.
just don't. And you would
Yeah.
they don't flaunt it because they don't have to. In fact, when I lived in Arizona, there was this one individual I met, family wealth, multi-generational. He ran the family foundation. And he didn't introduce people with his full last name. It was a hyphenated last name. He only did the first part of it. And he never wore his expensive watches out when he would meet people initially the first time. He was so tired of women trying to chase him for the fortune or for people trying to solicit him for who he was. They didn't see the person inside. Okay. And so that's part of it. I mean, it's at a certain point you become comfortable in your own skin. So like the millionaire next door mindset is whatever car you have has to be well maintained and presentable, and you buy quality over something that's disposable.
Yeah, when I used to build houses, I ran an HVAC company. We used to do houses that were anywhere between 20,000 square feet up to 55,000 square feet. So these houses were like the size of schools.
Hmm.
And you're right, like a lot of the people that we would talk to, they were extremely wealthy, and they would own multiple houses like this. They would have one in Florida, they have one in Europe, they'd have one here, they'd have one, all over the world. And they were always very like the ones who were good. I'm going to talk about the good ones. Were always very humble. They were always very modest. When I worked with the Reichmans, I remember this day. I was in the basement and I'm cutting concrete in the basement. And this
Wow.
is Mrs. Reichman. She comes downstairs and she's like, "Would you like to have a tea?" Like, okay. And so she brings me up into her kitchen and I'm covered in dust and I'm like mortified because I'm like, I'm going to leave this whole mess. She brings me up and we sit down and she pours a cup of tea and like she makes the tea. She doesn't have the servants make a tea or whatever. She makes the tea and we sit down and then we have a conversation. And she's all very interested in learning about me. And it was just, and I look back to that moment and I just think, if I kind of priced out her value per minute, that probably was more than what I would made in 10 years at that time. And it would just, the investment that she made was just, it was so interesting. And then when I put that in couple with somebody who's I met with, a few months ago, where we went down, she invited me into her place and she sat me down and said, "Would you like a coffee?" And I said, "Sure." And the coffee machine's about 3 feet from us. She yells upstairs for her person to come downstairs to go over and make the coffee and bring me the coffee. It was just a very different mindset. And the one mindset was one of abundance, that I don't need to do any posturing. And the other one was of mindsets of I need to do posturing.
That's the other piece too. When you find people who are truly at peace with themselves and they've achieved that financial place, it bleeds into everything they do. You cannot have that mindset and just do it in one area. So for example, like I love the fitness area and I love the constructs of fitness for dealing with other areas of my life. But as I work on the fitness and I work on my own goals with that, it affects everything I touch. And I am not interested, like, we spoke earlier about this. I have a client who is right now dying, and lovely, lovely woman. She's fought for a very long time, okay? And she's younger than I am. And she's a beautiful, beautiful person. Okay, she's one of these people that the inner beauty comes out and radiates. So while she's an attractive woman, okay, she's more attractive after 10 minutes of conversation than she was before she started talking to you. Okay, and being around her she's one of those people that the more you're around her, the more you feel good. Okay, you come away from the conversation feeling good, as opposed to being around people where you just don't always feel so good afterwards. It's like, it's just a huge difference. And there's been this massive sense of gratitude. She has appreciated every single day she's had because she's fought this battle for 17 years. And gratitude very much is a power and a force. And the people who truly achieve that wealth mindset have that sense of gratitude. Okay, if they don't, it doesn't last, and they wind up becoming very bitter. It doesn't make it through. There's this old comment in Philadelphia that old money is anything past the third generation. First generation makes it, second one kind of manages it, the third one blows it. But if you start
I've seen the second.
Okay, I've seen the second too, but I'm trying to stay optimistic. If you make it past the third generation, and the point is, you really, really, really have to have that sense of gratitude and not take it for granted.
Well, I think one thing that you said was really important, and I heard this first by a lady. Her name's Jody Sacco, and she's of the 10X community with Grant Cardone. I don't know if you know who that is.
Yeah.
And she brought this up in one of these coaching calls. She runs the 10X business coaching elite group. And she said, typically if something's showing up in one aspect of your life, it's going to show up in other or all aspects of your life.
Exactly.
And so her thing was around the idea of closing cycles. And the idea that if you start a cycle, like a sleep cycle, you're going to wake up the next morning and you need to close that cycle. Just like Jordan Peterson says, you got to make your bed in the morning.
Yeah.
Then when you start the cycle of having breakfast, you got to close that cycle of putting away your dishes. And when you start the cycle of work, setting your goals, you've got to close that cycle at the end of the day by reviewing them. And if you get used to that pattern of setting cycles, you're going to have that happen in all aspects of your life.
So one of the things that we do in my program is we start dealing with financial goals, but the system of this is based on what I call the adversity quotient. So people talk about smarter goals, but the problem is you wind up overloading the system and you don't have a way of choosing which goals to focus on. And I prefer the adversity quotient method, where we're literally looking and saying, okay, how do I feel about the different areas of my life? Okay, or you can do it in business. You can do it in all the areas because it's the same concept. And I can say, okay, which areas are the most important? In that, if I made an improvement in it, it would improve my life considerably. Or which areas of my business, if I made an investment in it and I focused on it in an extra special way, would improve the caliber of my business. So you turn into that and you look and you say, what are the different things that need to get done? And you make a value judgment. Which one or two things, if I did that hardcore, focused on it in an extra special way, would improve the situation? And then you take it and you say, all right, how long is it going to take for me to get this done? Let's be realistic and not set ourselves up for failure. And then how do I hardwire that into my schedule? So we'll take, let's say, the first quarter that you're on the program, and we're going to turn into it. And we're going to focus on that and schedule it. And we're going to take your schedule out and you're electronically, and you're going to hardcore put that into your day. And you're going to habit stack it so that you have a starting habit right before you do it. You do it, and then you have an ending habit. Like, for example, if I'm going to go work out at the end of the day, I have my workout clothes set up. I have my shoes there. I have my keys ready to go. So that I get up at that time, I go get changed, I then get in the car, go work out, come back, take a shower, put the clothes in the hamper or the washing machine to get going. And then I reset for the next day so that it's set up for the next morning. Okay, so
Well,
that
and
it's there.
I mean that sounds very similar to my morning routine. I'm up at 4:45 in the morning,
Hmm.
and what I used to do is I'd get up at 4:45 in the morning, and then I'd run around trying to figure out where's my, because I do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Where's my gi? Where's my rash guard? Oh shoot, where did I put my keys? My wallet. Oh my god, where did that go?
Right.
And it was a nightmare. And sometimes I wouldn't make it on time. And then the owner of the gym says, because I was coaching at the time, he said, "Coach needs to show up first, Steve." And I was like, he burned me. And it was just, that's all he had to say. And I was mortified. And then I had to fix it. And so kudos out to Crew Chris on that one. And so I ended up saying, okay, what do I need to do? And you're right. I had to set up a system. So the night before, I'd have my bag ready. I'd have my water bottle right beside, because many times I'd show up without a water bottle. That sucked. And, and then I'd have my wallet sitting there. I had my key sitting there, my phone, because my phone's charging. So I'd have that. That was no problem. And then so I could get up, and I would go out without having that panic moment. I'd go out with, a purposeful exit. A cycle would be closed. I'm out of the house. I'm ready to go. When I get back, I'm ready to kick off the day. I'm not in panic.
That's the thing. One of the things that I'm setting up in my own house, because I'm going to live the same thing I preach for everybody, and I've wanted to do this for a very long time. It's a series of dry erase boards that I will have in the hall between my bedroom and the rest of the house. Okay. And the reason why I want that is I'm going to hardwire in my schedule. And included in that are when all of my bills have to be paid. Okay. So my water bill hits on this, my power bill hits on this date, my internet bill hits on this date, my mortgage bill hits this, my health insurance, because I'm an independent businesswoman, hits on this day. And so you have all those things. I want to be able to always see that. I want to be able to always do that. One of the things that I'll say to people is we're going to set up a system so that on a monthly basis, on a week, the day that this is going to go out, and the week it's going to go out. So you'll start off on Sunday or Saturday, whichever day on the weekend you choose, where you have the ritual where, for example, you'll have the computer set up, whether it's in your office or your bedroom or on your kitchen table, wherever it is. You're going to sit down. You're going to have that set up so that you have, let's say you get your coffee or your tea, you sit down, you do it, and then afterwards you give yourself the reward where you're going to monitor what's in the account, what's going out this week, what's going out this week. And then I want you to check your credit. Some of the banks will have on the account, they'll monitor your credit for you, and you can flip a switch and see it. I want people to start scheduling that accountability. If you don't make that as part of your routine and hold yourself accountable to that, it won't happen.
Yeah. And that's so critically important. I think for us, we do have the whiteboard that, goes out 3 months. And that's how we schedule all of our kids' stuff, because we want them to know what's coming up and different events and stuff that are happening. We use that for that. So I'm fully engaged with the idea of having the whiteboard and having something big and visual, a little bit malleable, because things do change on that. That's why it's not a permanent marker board. It's a whiteboard. And so we can change things around. And financially, we do all of our financial reviews on our businesses on the 15th of the month. And so we lock out that day, and we get those things checked up, and we know that, by noon, 1 o'clock, exactly where everything sits, how we're going to sit for the end of the month. And so we have everything got kind of reviewed. The last thing that we do is we have a family review on every Sunday where we review goals for finances and goals for activities.
That's
And so
awesome.
we make sure that we have a meeting on every month, on every Sunday, to make sure, are we on target, and that everybody knows, because then, if they see dad's working a little bit longer, I had to go on an extra trip that month, they know why. And so they
Right.
can see the why rather than just the how of dad being out of the house.
But they're also, you're role modeling for them what it is to be financially responsible. We were all created to be responsible. And it's freedom really is independence. Okay. So when you think about it, to be free means you're independent. You can make those decisions on your own without consideration of somebody else that you don't want to. I mean, obviously, you and your spouse and you and your family are one unit, but it flows through. So I believe we were all created to be independent. And I believe, and responsible, it's the flip side of each other, which means I'm responsible for my body, for how I think, for how I feel, managing my emotions, emotional regulation. I'm responsible for the relationships I bring into my life. Okay. And I'm responsible for my financial tools, because financial tools are just tools that you use to mediate and do the things you need to do for yourself and for your family. That's it. Demystify it. Make this easy. So the wealth
The idea
mindset.
of
Go
the
ahead.
idea of responsibility, I think, is so critically important. I think it's an overused term, but an understood term
I
in the
agree.
sense of responsibility, because most people will take responsibility when it comes to their successes, and then they'll find other people to peg on every time that they had something that didn't go so well. And so they
Well,
love taking responsibility for success, but avoid it when it comes to challenges.
so here's the problem. One, mistakes are the only thing you really have in life. Okay, so when you make a mistake, you have two choices. You can choose to learn from it, or you can choose to blame others and not learn from it, in which case you're going to repeat it over and over and over again until the consequences get so high you can't afford to ignore it. The choice is in all things, and it's hard. I mean, there's all sorts of emotions that go around success, all sorts of emotions that go around programming for all different things, but also including money. I mean, I tell the story of my mother. Off the charts brilliant woman. Off the charts. Okay. Did math back in the 50s, got her degree in math, graduated in, I think, 1960, back in an era when women didn't do math. To the
Hmm.
point, she was at what is now referred to as Case Western Reserve University. The math department didn't really have very many women. And if you wanted to be part of a TA section, teaching assistant section, and get the extra help and to get the extra instruction, you had to be invited in. Well, none of the TAs invited my mother in. Okay, she was a woman and she came from a working class family. Okay, she worked her way up. I mean, her first job was between second and third grade. She was working for the school system, and that's how she paid for her school clothes and her school shoes. My mother was determined to succeed from a very early age, and she worked her tail off and, quite frankly, is brilliant. But
Hmm.
she never had anybody talk to her about financial issues on a larger scale. Yes, she budgeted, and yes, she was very careful with her checkbook. But okay, those larger issues of being completely out there and financially successful on a larger scale, when she married somebody who came from money. And when they got divorced, it was devastating for her, not just emotionally, not just spiritually, but financially. And that's another piece that people don't understand. When you get married, for example, marriage is a partnership to build a life. So there's a financial component in there too. And what most people don't understand is that everybody is financially set back by divorce, but the woman usually is knocked down two or three rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. So people don't understand the devastation that this can cause. But anyway, so my mother really didn't get that education on the financial aspects. And when she got divorced, she wound up meeting up with a friend who was a financial planner. And this person, I was never really impressed with her, and we'll leave it at that. Okay, I'm trying to be kind. But my mother is very defensive of it. She doesn't like actually discussing it. The thing with my mother is that, as brilliant as she is, and everybody has this, there's a pride factor. Okay, my mother, both my brothers are surgeons. When she had her initial back issues, she didn't want her sons, who are surgeons, you know, and we're at the Mayo, to participate in the conversation. She actually didn't tell them the truth that she was actually having the surgery. I outed her the night before the surgery. She hasn't really forgiven me for that. But the point is, this is who she is. We have a problem. And the problem is that in the United States, the level of financial literacy has been pathetically low for about 4 to 5 generations. And so you cannot give what you do not have. So if you don't have those skills and you don't have that knowledge base and you're not in a position to acquire it, how do you ensure that your kids have it?
And I think it's such a beautiful time right now for a reinvention on the education system around kids. With the adoption of AI into all aspects of life, the one I think is going to see the most amount of revolutionary change is going to be in the education system.
I hope
There's
so.
a lady who's right now building out a whole school system throughout the United States that's really, really debasing the current model in the sense that if you actually take, and this was, I was mortifying when I found this out, if you actually take the amount of time that's allocated for learning for students on a daily basis, it's 2 hours out of the day.
It's
So they'll
pathetic.
spend an hour to get to school. They're going to spend an hour to get from home. They're going to have an hour wasted at lunch. They're going to have an hour wasted at recesses, which there's no programming. And then all the rest of it is shuffling around for 2 hours of learning. So what this lady does is she actually takes out all of that mess and takes out the teachers completely and puts in AI to do all the teaching. Now, most people think, oh my God, no, don't want that, need to have teachers. Well, no, AI actually does a really good job of actually teaching kids how to learn because it'll adapt to their learning styles, number one. It'll produce amazing metrics, number two. So you have all the KPIs. Now, this doesn't mean that there's not people involved. It means the teachers are now being replaced with AI to do the teaching, but the teacher's role has now changed into being an educational coach. So they come in with KPIs and they come in and work with the students on a one-to-one basis to really build out learning plans and to really help the kids become successful. And it also allows for times for the kids to get out and do joyful activities that are outside of the school.
So interesting. Two things that I wanted to bring up. One, in response to that. One, South Korea, I think, did an experiment where they judged what would happen if they just had a teacher read from the textbook, okay, in front of the kids, versus they had a teacher teach the program lesson plan. And they found that if the teacher just sat there and read to the kids, there was a better actual performance outcome than if they were going through their modern teaching methods, which I find bizarre. My kids went to a Montessori school because Montessori, if done correctly, and not all of them are correct, okay? No, some of them are free for all, but Montessori, when done correctly with the right child, okay, if it works with their learning styles and their personalities and is reinforced at home, don't forget the home component, works extremely well, and the kids are extremely efficient. So the kids don't have to do homework. They wind up learning how to do homework because they have to learn how to manage it at home. But my kids learned from a very early age that this was their work, not mine. And they'd say, Mom, you do your work, I'll do mine. You don't have to worry about it. Okay. And I never had to manage their homework ever. Okay. Which was great, but I had to cooperate with that system. The second thing is, I didn't realize the extent of the lack of knowledge and the multi-generational aspect of financial literacy until I taught a course in my kids' middle school. And I don't know that I told you about this, but I went in to teach what I called economic and financial reality. So it would be an economic concept and then the finance and then apply it in their lives. And the first time I did this, I was a little raw with it, but after a few minutes I said, all right, let's cut to the chase. Huge whiteboard, ceiling to floor. Okay, ceiling, and it was just covered this huge wall. And I turned to the kids and I said, 7th and 8th graders, tell me what you want in your lives. So the boys, God bless them, had all sorts of interesting things that they wanted, but they could name it, and they were pretty predictable. The girls, this was Arizona, Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, came back with, they could tell me the jewelry, the houses, the furs, the clothes, the trips, the airplanes, all of it, the yachts. They were able to give it in great detail. This is what they wanted. This is what they expected from life. And I filled up the whiteboard and turned to the kids and said, how are you going to pay for it?
Mm.
In the center of the room, there was the popular girl and the popular boy. And they're sitting right next to each other and they're kind of cute. And the popular girl waited a few seconds and then filled in the silence with, I'm going to marry someone who will buy it for me. And that young man sitting next to her, God bless him, shifted his body and the desk at the same time and said, good luck with that. And that started a whole snowball of a conversation. So at first I thought it was going to be a problem with the class. And then I found out that the feedback from the parents and also the head of that little middle school was very positive. It was part of a charter Montessori. Very, very, very positive. So a couple of weeks later, I'm in the room and I saw all the kids had like Frappuccino drinks, Starbucks drinks. Okay. It was relatively new at the time. Whatever it was there. And I saw a bunch of the girls, not all of them, had big fraps. And I turned to them and I said, okay, how much did it cost for that drink? And they told me the drink, I think it was like $4 at the time, because this was years ago. And I said, all right, how much did it take? Did you buy that yourself with money you earned, or did your parents give you the money? So none of the kids who actually worked to earn extra money had actually bought their own Frappuccinos. All of the kids who had them got the money from their parents. So I asked them, I said, how much did it take your parents to earn to be able to give you the $4 for that? And they said, well, $4. I said, no, there's federal income tax. So we talked about that. There's, in Arizona, state income tax. There's sales tax. So they're like,
and Canada will have carbon tax on top of it.
God, don't remind me of Canada. Then, I turned to the kids and I said, okay, is this a want or a need? And they said, what do you mean? I said, don't your parents have to pay for where you live, transportation, food, power, clothing, shoes, all of those things, medicine, healthcare, before you get a Frappuccino? And they looked at me, and all of a sudden, a bunch of things cascaded in. No one had done that exercise with them. Okay.
It's so interesting when people look at the cost of things, mm-hmm. and they'll look at it and say, things are so expensive, and mm-hmm. and then people always ask. I actually had this conversation with a buddy last night. He's starting a shirt making business.
Okay.
And just, whatever, he's making t-shirts. I'm like, great. Like, I always get t-shirts made, and I'd love you to quote on making my t-shirts. He says, don't worry, I'm going to give you the friends deal. And I said, I'm going to give you some advice.
Don't do that.
The friends deal works in this way. A friend helps a friend, which means if you're going to give me the lowest price possible, am I being a good friend? Mm-hmm. I do not want you to give me the lowest price. I want you to give me a fair price. I want to give me a market price. I want you to give me something that you're going to walk away making money, and I'm going to walk away being happy. And that's what's going to make a deal. But when he starts his business, when we were talking about the idea of the business, is some of those fixed costs that he didn't factor in that factor into that business. Just like you say, as running a household, there's fixed costs that are running that household. The cost of the mortgage, the cost of the insurance. Then there's the operating costs that happen, as in, the cost of your hydro or whatever. And then there's the cost of operations done, cost of goods sold, like your taxes that you have to pay. And a lot of people don't put that together, let alone in their business, that they don't do it in their personal life.
Right. And that's the other thing, like business financial advisory, where you're actually walking through these steps with the business, is a very critical thing that most financial advisors don't do. Okay. And I've said this to people. It's like, look, you know what? Your business needs a separate financial plan. You need to have an emergency fund solely for the business. You can't bleed the two. Okay. Mm-hmm. You need to have a succession plan for the business. Why? Because if it's a really critical asset for you and for your family, something happens to you and you're the key person and you don't have this planned out, guess what happens? 80 to 90% of the value of that business is gone. It's like sharks circling in the water. Okay. Yeah.
And I would say 100% is gone. If the business can't operate without you, you have no business, you have a job.
Right. But if you have a business and you have a succession plan and you have the ability and you have the systems and structure set up so that you could have somebody else, if there's money in the succession plan, whether it's an insurance policy or key man insurance, or you have the cash flow or the reserves, okay, to hire somebody to step in for 6 months to allow you to either get better or to sell it off, you have a much better chance of getting something out of it at the end. It's Absolutely. You really have to understand that whole process. And selling a business in the US can be 18 to 24 months. Mm-hmm. Okay. Really think on that. That's part of it. But it's also really amazing to me that people don't understand the costs of this. And then the other piece is I am willing to pay. I'm very strategic. Okay. Everything that I am doing now is tied into either my physical, personal goals or my business. And that's how I'm advancing that. Okay. I recognize I have to invest in my business and I have to invest in my well-being. Okay. And that's just period, the end. Everything that gets done because it's connected to the business. I appreciate that. I do that. I'm all on board with that. People need to understand that there's always an opportunity cost. always and forever. If I'm making one decision, I'm deciding not to do other things instead of that one decision. I'm talking to you instead of doing something else connected to business or something else connected to family.
Yep.
Okay. And that's a
And it's the
decision.
best choice you made.
Thank you. Actually, I have fun talking to you, so I learn anyways. So,
But I think you're 100% right. Most people don't realize that one yes is 1,000 no's.
mhm,
And every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to everything else for that moment, because you can never see that moment again in time.
exactly.
And so, really taking agency of all of your choices, active and passive, which means that when you say yes to something, that is an active choice. When you say no to something, that is an active choice.
And
And
I am getting better at saying no. I've also learned, for example, there are some people in my life and that I think are wonderful people, but for a variety of reasons, they are not good for me. Okay. In that they don't help me feel like I'm advancing in those goals. Okay. So sometimes it's because people have an issue, okay, that they're not willing to address, but it doesn't mean I drop them. I can be kind, I can be compassionate, but it means I limit their exposure to me in places when I'm vulnerable and I need the time. Okay. And I have to say no. I'll take a phone call from my kids at all times. However, they know that when I'm at work, I'm working. So they don't call unless it's important.
yep, yep.
Okay. And I mean, I have the ability and the luxury of setting those lines with my kids because my kids are in their 20s. They're adults.
My kids are young. My kids are 13, 9, and 12.
Mm-hmm.
And they know when they come up to my office that, when the lights are on, I'm recording. When the blinds are up, they can come in. And so they know all the signals to say whether, and they know when they come up, if I'm on the phone, they're going to give the little, is it short or is it a long conversation? So they know all the hand signals, and they can all be programmed to do that. And if you do that, then what they see is that, when you're working, and that's why I love working at home, because they can see what I'm doing. They can engage with the fact it's not just this black box of working somewhere else. But that being said, I do work in the office at other offices because I also like that same, giving that back same vibe, not to just my kids, but to my peers and my coworkers. Because in that situation, they can also see the activity level that you're doing when you're on the phone all the time, when you're on podcasts all the time, when you're interfacing with people, you're running seminars all the time, and they see that level of activity, and that kind of spreads that amount of enthusiasm towards doing things that are productive.
But you mentioned that key word, and that key word is agency. You have complete agency in your life, and you take agency in your life. Okay. So I am a survivor. I know other people who are survivors of, and everybody goes through things in life. Are you a survivor or are you a passive victim? Or are you just sort of a passive witness to it? Okay. You have to decide what exists in your world. Okay. And it's and how you're going to deal with it. You don't have control over everything. What I really truly have control in my life over is very small, and it really boils down to how I respond and how I proactively act.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think once you take ownership of everything that happens around you, whether it's a storm that happened or whether it's a tax change that happened, a market shift, anything like that, you can take ownership of that by taking ownership of your response to that situation.
Exactly.
And if you don't take ownership, and then you're like, play the victim card of, oh, woe is me because the market shifted, the interest rates went up, so I can't do anything, and I'm such a victim. You're going to be one of those people that's going to self-manifest that destruction of your success.
And
Whereas I know so many people in the tough markets. When I first started in real estate, it was 2014, which was a very tough market.
yep.
And I didn't know any better. I mean, I came in, and this was where ignorance is sometimes bliss. I came in and I thought, I'm going to crush it. I didn't know that this was the worst real estate market that they had in, 10 years or whatever. And I sold 43 houses. And most
No
people
one
don't
told you
sell
to do.
43 houses in, 10 years, let alone in 1 year.
Well,
And
that's amazing, and it's amazing that you mentioned that. But here's the other piece. Let's say the market is going to go down. Let's say we're going to have a little bit of a recession. Let's say there's a slowdown. That's the time for me to get into and get aggressive about building out my business when other people are afraid to do it. You went forth and you went out and sold houses. Okay, when it was a rough market, you didn't know it was a rough market. You just said, "Hey, this is what I need to do, and I'm going to do it day in, day out." You made a
well, I had, I
statement.
had, I had, I had a secret weapon though. I had a secret weapon that most people avoid. Most people underestimate whenever they're starting a business, running a business, or really making any decision.
What's the
I had a
secret?
Michelle Mason. I had a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
I had somebody who was able to take me from zero to massive success because she helped me avoid all the pitfalls. She helped me make decisions quickly because if I had to make decisions slow, I probably would have done half of that. If I went through some of those pitfalls, I probably would have done half of the half. And I probably would have done what everybody does in their first year of real estate, which is a whole whack of nothing,
Right.
but problems, but challenges and adversity. Whereas I had a mentor who helped me avoid all of those things and scale quickly and become massively successful.
See, and that's the key. Okay, so one of the things that most people don't have, you are giving your children mentorship, not just in entrepreneurship, but in financial issues. Okay, you are educating your children because they are living it with you day in and day out. Most people, at least in the US, don't have that from their parents. Okay, truly from their parents. And that's part of the reason why I built my program, because I can't lead you to water. I can lead you to water. I can't make you drink. But the goal is to give you people the mentorship they need to be able to take ownership of it so that they can actually make decisions to do better. I don't blame people for being at the position that they're in. There are a lot of people who make a tremendous amount of money who are financially destroying themselves and they don't realize it.
Yep.
I remember one client who was very successful, a woman a couple years older than I am. This was about 4 or 5 years ago, and phenomenally successful woman. And when she got a major league promotion, she was recruited and her salary went up a lot. I can't give details, but I want to protect her confidentiality. But she put herself in a position where she was in debt, credit card debt of over $100,000. And what she would do is every year she would rack up the credit card debt and then she would use her bonus to pay it off. But she never put money away for her own retirement. She took her emergency fund and invested in a much larger house, but her children were in college at the time. Okay. And her parents were paying for their educations. So it was one of those things where I just sort of looked at this and she said she had in a retirement vehicle that was at the time about $180,000. And she said, I'd like to sell this out. And I said to her, okay, let's go through what's your tax bracket. She told me it was the highest federal bracket in the US. She lives in a state where there was a state tax there. And then she was under the age of 59 and a half. And she was employed someplace else. So she had a 10% penalty that she wasn't going to be able to avoid. And when she realized she wasn't going to be able to pay off the debt, she was upset. And then I said, okay, so let's talk about this a little bit further. She said, well, if I sell it, I'll at least pay off most of it. I said, okay, yeah, you will. I said, but let's talk about something. I said, if you're doing this every year, and I said the killer question was, how many people at your level have complete control over when and how they retire? And that was the question that floored it. And it was a really rough conversation because I was trying to advocate for her, not just for her that day, but for her 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Mm. And I said, look, I understand that you've got a cash flow issue. I get it. Okay, but what can we do to shift the behavior so that you are in control of your long-term financial destiny? I have had people who had moderate incomes who were able to live off one income and invest the other and retired in their 50s with more than they needed. Okay? And they were driving around cars that sounded a lot like your Passat or Jetta. Sorry, that was a Jetta. But the point is, they had the resources.
Hey, you know what? I'm going to interject. That Jetta, I bought it for $2,500. I put 100,000 kilometers on it, and I sold it for $2,500.
You got more than your ROI.
That was a great Jetta.
Right, and so that's the whole point. They were like that. You would never guess from how they dressed or where they lived that they had what they had. They were the complete millionaires next door. And then I've had people who were professionals with very high incomes who I had one where the individual wound up having a medical issue and he had a family, lots of children. And unfortunately, if it wasn't for the long-term disability insurance, okay, he and his family would have had a real problem. Okay, and thank God he had that. So there are financial defenses people need to set up, but the biggest defense is understanding that the money is there to help you build out the life for you and your family. That's it. Okay. And if you don't have family, it's to build out whatever you can believe and contribute to society. It's a tool. It's not mysterious. Okay. It's just a set of tools. Learn how to use it. Build something productive instead of breaking your ankles. Do you remember that scene from the horror movie, the Stephen King horror movie, where he's the main character is an author who gets into a car crash in the mountains and a crazy fan abducts him. And when he tries to run away, she takes out a hammer and she hobbles him by putting the block between his legs. And every time I see people doing that to themselves financially, that's the image that goes through my mind.
That's a horrible image.
But that's really what it is.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, look, what you're doing to yourself is you're really just hurting yourself. Okay, what do you want? What do you really want for yourself? What do you believe you have the right to build?
Well, and I mean, when I look at money, I look at money in two elements. I look as revenue, and that trickles down to profit. And I get profit first model and all that other stuff, but that's a whole longer conversation. But we're just going to put that in the bucket of revenue. And then we look at wealth. And those are two very different things.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of times people can solve a wealth problem with not just necessarily a cost control problem, but a revenue generation solution. Because, you know, that Frappuccino, if that Frappuccino represents 1% of your income in a pre-tax perspective, that's a problem. If that Frappuccino represents 0.00000000001, that's like the penny you dropped on the street and you might not have to worry about it. So the idea is if you take that income and you multiply it up to a level to which your costs, your base cost, this is why wealthy people do so well, is that if they contain their costs just like a normal person would have, but they amplify their income to a position that fraction is so small, they're able to make a lot of other choices. Exactly. And so by not only controlling the costs, but working on growing the revenue side of things so that they can earn more, I think that's something that can give people a lot more opportunities in the future.
Here's the thing. You have to be strategic and make that decision. And the question is, do you believe that you have the right to build this out? There are a lot of people who have very strange conceptions of what wealth is and what a wealth mindset is. You cannot go anywhere that your mind has not gone before you. So when I look at the program that I have, and it's really a mentorship program, it's an empowerment program. We work on the psychology of this. We use a lot of the cognitive techniques that have proven so successful, the positive psychology done correctly. Okay, and we build it out on that at the same time as we start up with building financial defenses. And once those are up, we can then start getting strategic on building out the foundation. But it is a mentorship program, and it does have to function on the psychology of it. If you don't believe you have the right to be successful, you're not going to be. You're going to sabotage yourself.
Totally agree with that.
Okay, and so that's one of those pieces. And I understand this. I've seen this. I've walked through this in my own life. I've walked through the power of the mind. You know, there are other issues that I can talk about from my background and what my family has gone through. But I really, truly believe that you have to develop and protect the mind.
I totally agree. And that's why I love having the podcast, the money, the mindset, and the mentoring podcast. And Monica, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show and covering so many aspects of mindset, so many aspects around strategies around handling money, and really the idea of being able to build that wealth both in personal development as well as in the bank account. So I really do appreciate the conversation. And what's the best way for people to reach you if they want to continue on the conversation about how they can really develop themselves and develop their
Okay, so we have a couple of websites. So it's harmonyassetam.com, at harmonyassetmanagement.com. We have the Wealth Academy, and that's harmonywealthacademy.com. But we also just have my email. Feel free to email me. You can use the links on the websites, but you can also directly email me at mkaufman, Kaufman, at harmonyam.com. And I would love to hear from you. If you'd like to be a part of our program, we will be launching that very shortly, so you can participate in that. If you really want the mentorship and to work together in a group environment where you get the support you need to actually shift and do those things that you can do so that you can move from where you are to where you want to go. Hope exists when you have a viable pathway to get to where you want to be.
I love it. I love it.
Well,
Monica,
thank
it's
you for
been a
having me.
pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll see you guys on the next one.